We're absolutely delighted to be here and hosting this event and working on the engagement for this initiative. I've got the protocol slide up at the moment. I think Anita's done a very good job and covered all that, so let's move on to this. The KTN, we were invited by the Innovation Working Group to help with the dissemination and outreach of this initiative, FeedUK. We're delighted. Some of you may well know the KTN already. You may look at this and think a little bit different. We did rebrand in the last week or so. And we've also done some messages which have tried to simplify what we do. And I think this one message we've got in particular really goes on about what we're here today to do. There's been this initiative, FeedUK. It's been set up by a combination of 4 of the catapults, the digital, the satellite applications, high value manufacturing, and the connected places. They've also worked with the 4 UK AgriTech centres, AgriAPI, Agrimetrics, SCL and CHAP. We've had some input from academic groups, the Internet of Food Things from the University of Lincoln. And they've also been working with a number of large food companies such as Barfoot's, Sheep, Ocado and Sainsbury's. So they've brought this all together, but they want to have this open dialogue with you and everybody interested and part of our agri-food sector to engage with you, tell you what they're trying to do today, and really get that engagement and see if you'll be part of it as we move forward. So I like to think it's KTN, we're in a great position to help this happen. And I really just want to reiterate that again, this is about an inclusive process. It is a very clear message that this isn't a done deal or anything like that. It's a start of a process and a journey, and hopefully it's going to be an exciting journey. So if we look at what we're doing today, that's the welcome and the housekeeping. I'm keeping it as brief as possible because I'm pretty sure you've not really joined to listen to me. We've got the next 35 minutes or so with Judith and Paul, who can give you some more detail about the initiative and what it means to everybody. I've got a short little break then to get your input. We say we've got a lot of people interested in this and the repeat one that we're doing next week. That gives a fair and open chance for everybody to input today and give us some thoughts. We have got a 10-minute Q&A session, as I said, put those questions into that Q&A box. I've got colleagues with 2 mats in the background who are going to help look at those and probably amalgamate some of those questions and put it into one. And I've got the pleasure of just closing things off and letting you to go on your way, hopefully with a call to action, that you'll be able to take things on and become part of this very exciting and interesting process. So, as I say, you're not here to listen to me. You've come to listen to Paul and Judith. So I'm going to hand over to Paul now, who's going to start telling you a little bit more about the FeedUK initiative.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon, and hello everybody. Welcome to these first of these 2 briefing sessions, as Simon says. A big thank you, to the KTN for hosting this session, and to all of you for giving up your time to attend. As Simon said, my name is Paul Clarke. My day job is CTO of Ocado. I also sit on a bunch of government and industry advisory boards, and one of those is the Innovation and Working Group of the Food and Drink Sector Council. And the FeedUK initiative that we're going to be talking about today, as Simon said, is being led by that Innovation Working Group with support from other organisations. And my co-host today, Judith Batchelar, who's head of or director of brand at Sainsbury's, is a member of the Food and Drink Sector Council and chairs the Innovation Working Group. So, as many of you will be aware, the agri-food sector is the biggest industrial sector in the UK, employing nearly 4 million people. And the efficient, scalable, resilient and sustainable operation of this incredibly complex system of systems is vitally important to everybody in the UK. The pandemic has brought this into sharp relief, and going forwards, we're going to need to drive even greater efficiency, scalability, resilience and sustainability into this system in order to prepare for future exogenous shocks that may come our way. The impact of climate change and the preparation for achieving our net zero goals is one such example. However, to do that, we're going to need new and more powerful tools to better understand and optimize our food system. And addressing that need is at the core of this FeedUK initiative that we're going to be talking about. Now, the UK may be an island, but when it comes to food, we're part of a much bigger global food system that we rely on heavily. Once again, the current pandemic has demonstrated how our food security depends on a complex web of international trade agreements, supply chains, and logistics routes. And indeed, as we implement the post-Brexit landscape, the operation and optimization of this web is only going to become more complex. As I said already, the food system is a complex system of systems. It's also an interwoven with other systems such as energy, transportation and logistics, retail, healthcare, and indeed our environment. There are many potential levers we can pull to affect the food system, but doing so blindly could have all sorts of unintended consequences on other systems. So we're going to need to be able to model and predict the impact of pulling those levers. And once again, this is at the core of FeedUK. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Judith for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Paul. And I think that's a massive help in terms of the introduction to all of this, because I like to think of this as Paul describes as the system of systems. But one of the things that we are very conscious that we don't need to be accused of is trying to boil the ocean. So we have tried to put some boundaries around the scope of the food system that we're looking at in this project. And we've used the one that is commonly used by BEIS and the work that was done by the City University. So I put that there to share so that when we talk about the food system, everyone is really clear about what we're talking about. Next slide, Paul, please. If you were in any doubt from the description that Paul's just given around the challenges, whether it's the coronavirus, whether it's Brexit that's up and coming, the up and coming legislation will really focus your mind, because never before has there been a more dynamic and busy space when it comes to legislation in our sector. And as you will all know, that we're already one of the most highly regulated sectors in the world, and that's about to become even more regulated. And don't get me wrong, these are all really good things, whether it's the agriculture bill, the environment bill, whether it's things like the waste electrical and electronics regulations and what we need to do about taking back those goods and recycling them, whether it's about the different approaches across the devolved governments to things like plastics or alcohol, etc., etc. It is very, very complicated, and you don't have to think very far ahead to look at this over the next 3 years to say, both in terms of the implementation of this legislation and indeed for the regulators, whether that's the Food Standards Agency, the Environment Agency, the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority, whoever those regulators may be, they are going to need some innovative tools in order to measure compliance to some of these regulations. And indeed, some of them, particularly things like the Environment Bill and the Agriculture Bill, are going to require massive amounts of data to be used in terms of proving that compliance. Next slide, please, Paul. So in summary, you know this, I know this, we've got a complex, interdependent, global, local, evolving food system that needs to be responsive to knocks and challenges. And at the moment, we, in our own parts of the food system, have visibility of our little bit of this massive infrastructure, but we don't have oversight of it. And I know from my own experiences, and I know talking to some of you, that if we did have that oversight as multi-stakeholders, as part of this massive and complex system, we would be better able to understand and manage the system and our part in it. So if there's a reason to believe, it's this. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Judith. So what is FeedUK? Well, it's a visionary initiative to incrementally build a model of our food system that would be fed with data from across the entire system. And some of these data would come from existing sources, some would be crowdsourced, some would need to come from new sources, ranging from relatively static to near real time. And these data and the models built on top of them would deliver a new level of transparency and understanding of the food system. They would be invaluable in guiding our optimization of the food system to achieve the greater efficiency, scalability, resilience, and sustainability that I mentioned earlier. They would help us understand our role within the global food system. They would also play an important enabling role for the National Food Strategy, the part 1 of which was recently published. Now, digital twins are very much in the zeitgeist at the moment, and they are fundamental to certainly what we do at Ocado. And for those of you not familiar with them, put simply, they are a digital model of a physical system where the data from the physical twin, the physical system, flows into the digital twin, and then you use the digital twin to derive insights and outcomes, which then can flow back into the physical twin to optimize its behaviors. And ultimately, FeedUK is about building a family of interconnected digital twins of the food system. And these individual digital twins would need to be joined together with smart glue, if you like, in the form of shared data marts, standards, middleware, ontologies, and other digital infrastructure, which you might collectively call the digital commons. And to implement these digital twins and the underlying data infrastructure, we're going to require a basket of technologies and competencies such as public cloud, simulation, blockchain, sensing, the Internet of Things, and many others. And we will use visualization, mapping, and dashboards to provide a wide range of stakeholders with personalized access to the information and insights. We will enable operators within the food system to make better informed decisions in order to increase their efficiency, reduce their risks, and the unintended consequences of their actions. FeedUK would also be an important piece of an even bigger puzzle that's being assembled. For example, the same underlying data infrastructure needed for FeedUK would also be needed for many other applications and moonshots that are being discussed. And there is an initiative underway to build a national digital twin, which the food system digital twins could be part of. On this slide, we have elaborated some of the detailed outcomes that FeedUK would deliver in areas such as diagnostics, modeling, planning, and policy making. And I'll hand back to Judith, who will drill into some historical case studies where these FeedUK outcomes would have been useful.
Thanks again, Paul. So I've taken each of those headings and then looked at some of the things that would bring that alive, really to show that what we would have had if we had had a FeedUK to manage these. And the first one, some of you will remember well, which was the shortage of CO2 that we had 2 summers ago, when fundamentally we didn't understand the going all over the place. We didn't understand the impact of CO2 on our systems and the vulnerability of it. So there were some real capacity issues around CO2. And in terms of what that meant, there were the people that said, well, doesn't really matter, does it? It just means we won't have very many fizzy drinks this summer. But actually what it meant was much, much more than that, because CO2 is one of the refrigerant gases that's used in preference to the fluorocarbons in terms of improving our carbon footprint across the chilled food sector. CO2 is important in abattoirs in terms of stunning of animals and humane slaughter. CO2 is important in modified atmosphere packaging and extending the shelf life of products. All of these things where we didn't understand the vulnerability of the system. And that's before you even think about where CO2 is used in hospitals and medicine, for example. The second one, which you can see in front of you, is using this to hypothesize. And Ocean Mind is an interesting tool. It's a combination of Earth observation technologies and databases that are all overlaid with each other. And this is being used at the moment to look at sustainable tuna fishing in the Indian Ocean. Some of you may know that 25% of all fish in the world is caught illegally, unregulated and unreported. And from a biodiversity point of view, from a legality point of view, from an ocean health point of view, that is not helpful. and existing certification schemes like MSC, which are great in one sense, only start once that fish is landed. So what is going on thousands of miles away in the Indian Ocean is not manageable. And at the moment, there is no way of managing that, but there is with this technology. But the data that comes from Ocean Mind and the richness of that data can be used to provide provenance, authenticity. It can be used to provide transparency and even certification. So huge opportunities with this kind of data and technology. Next slide, please, Paul. The data can, and also the digital twins can be used to model. So this is a real live example of basically looking at supplier locations, looking at where the farmers are, where the dairy farmers are, where the processing units are. And as you know, the collection of milk to the processing unit, to the retailer, depot and outward is massively complicated, because you're talking about, you know, a fresh product that's collected daily, and the cost and the carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions associated with all of that is massive. But by using this data to understand geographical location, to understand product and capacity flows, you can build a much more efficient and real-time logistics operation. Next one, please. So on scenario planning, one of the things that happened early on and was part of the early onset of the coronavirus and panic buying was an avian flu outbreak. But of course, in the excitement of the coronavirus, nobody was really interested in this, but it caused all sorts of problems. First of all, because everyone was at home, egg consumption went up 15%. So there was already an increased demand for egg consumption. Egg production was down because of a big avian flu outbreak. And not only that, when eggs were found, the amount of paper pulp to provide eggs in this retail format, which is a box of eggs, was in short supply, because a lot of this would have been supplied as liquid egg into the food service sector, which we know had all but shut down. So again, if you had that detail and you had that data and you could see those product flows, you could model what might happen in an avian flu outbreak and predict some of those things. And in fact, the irony of this is, you know, everybody had made a big move away from plastic packaging, but the only way to provide the volume of eggs that was required and is still required through the coronavirus in retail pack was to supplement the capacity of paper packaging with plastic egg packaging, which of course, from a consumer point of view, is seen as a very backward step. Next one, please. And in strategic planning, so one of the things that Brexit brings with us is the worry about fresh food imports across the short crossings at Dover, Calais, and the amount that's coming from Southern Europe. It also goes with the fact that we have our biggest trade gap in horticulture and fresh fruit and veg at 9 billion. And if you were to say, actually, from a national strategic point of view and from a food strategy point of view, we are going to develop a strategy of import substitution, and we're going to substitute 10% of fruit and veg imports, homegrown fruit and veg. What could that look like? And how could you model that? Where would it be grown? What would be grown? Who would be growing it? How would it be distributed? But again, those things are very difficult at the moment because we don't have oversight of what is currently coming into the country at various different times of the year, because that in itself changes, as you know, on a seasonal basis, and what that might do to consumption. So again, strategic planning, really useful tool. Next one, please. And in terms of policy making, you might not be able to see this slide very clearly, but this was basically a slide showing what was happening from soft drinks and the soft drinks levy, which was the sugar tax levy, which was set at 2 different levels for 2 different types of sugar content, and what that would mean in terms of products that were exempt from tax, products that would attract that tax. And you could model what might happen to, first of all, consumption at those different tax levels, and indeed what would happen to the tax income that the Treasury would get from that sugar levy. And you could also model what that would mean from a consumer point of view in terms of price inflation. So again, policymakers would have the most amazing tool to be able to model some of those policies, whereas at the moment we tend to be able to predict what those might look like, but not necessarily model different scenarios very accurately. But again, real-time data, very easy to come by in this sector because a lot of that retail EPOS data is available every 15 minutes. So there's no excuse for not knowing those things. Next one, please. So in terms of the detailed outcomes and what this looks like, there's the things that we've just talked about, which help the thinking and the planning, but there's also the things that will help us in the doing and the ability to be able to make things happen in the real world operationally. And whether that is the implementation of strategies that we've just talked about and policies, because we would be able to see and plan for those implementation programs to take place in a timely and appropriate manner, whether it's driving operational productivity because we've got that visibility. So some of the examples like the milk supply chain example, or whether it's about measuring ongoing performance. And again, a lot of those things, particularly when you're talking about some of the environmental and social impacts that we're going to have to measure and report on going forward. Some of those complicated things that will be part of the Environment Bill and the Agriculture Bill. So it's not just about having a brilliant insight tool to create a brilliant or better and brilliant business decisions. It's also about, once you've made those decisions, implementing them, driving them, and measuring your performance at the same time, which is very difficult in normal circumstances to make that a complete data flow. It's very, very difficult. Next slide. In terms of aiding in implementation, one of the things I talked about just now was Ocean Mind. One of the things that we are talking about now is Forest Mind, and you will know last week there was the announcement from government on the consultation that is due back in October on basically the making it mandatory to understand the forest footprint of the products that you sell, and actually making it illegal to sell products that have been involved in deforestation. That is, as we all know, a massive ask, because these are very complicated, convoluted supply chains, things like palm oil, soya, biofuels, beef and leather, all associated with deforestation. But Forest Mind is the same kind of thing. It's a combination of data, it's a combination of Earth observation technologies. And if at the end of this consultation in October, this becomes new regulation, we will have a tool to be able to implement that regulation, and the regulator will have a tool to measure compliance. So again, it's a version of this, but again, a very powerful tool to have. Next one. In terms of driving operational productivity, one of the things, again, that came out of the coronavirus was the fact that there was very little food waste at the beginning of the coronavirus, because actually the shelves were empty. And one of the things that became really important to us was actually redistributing those foods to food banks for the socially and economically vulnerable, and understanding if that food was going to the right place. And at the moment, that's still very manual in the way that's done. And of course, when we get back to something that's near normal, when a lot of these redistribution channels are small charities working at a local level, or indeed mobile phone apps that are collecting data and then redistributing that food. At the moment, we have no visibility of where that goes downstream. So potentially it could be being wasted further downstream. We just don't know it because it's outside of our current scope of the system. So again, making sure that we manage food waste, because we know particularly in this country, the big chunk of food waste is post-consumer waste. It's not the waste that occurs upstream, it's the waste that occurs downstream. Giving us visibility of that and being able to manage that more effectively and to avoid that food waste would be brilliant. Thank you. Next one. And then measuring ongoing performance. And I put this one in because it's very topical. Some of you may have seen the work that Marcus Rashford is doing, actually with supporting the National Food Strategy on 3 elements of the National Food Strategy, one of which is increasing the value of Healthy Start vouchers from £3.10 to £4.25 for all pregnant women and children under 4. It's something around free school meal vouchers for children up to 16 years of age. And it's about the provision of holiday clubs, which are clubs that would provide food and activities for children on free school meals in the school holidays. And Marcus is getting unbelievable coverage of this, and it's become something of a national topic, and certainly is occupying BBC Breakfast TV. The challenge is understanding where those vouchers are needed, understanding where those vouchers are taken up. So at the moment, in some areas, less than 50% of the people who are eligible to have Healthy Start vouchers actually have them and use them. So there's awareness driving, and there's also accessibility, because a lot of these things you have to get to online, and then you have to have a printer to print off your voucher to take to a store. So there's massive piece that says, okay, we might, from a policy point of view, in the spending review, talk about those things. Treasury may make that money available for those schemes, but if those schemes aren't being taken up in the areas where their need is most and by families on universal credit, and we don't know when they come into our stores what they're spending those vouchers on, because we want to drive those into healthy purchases like fruit and veg. Again, the data and the technology would enable us to understand whether that particular government intervention was having the desired outcome that we all hoped it would. And at the moment, there is not a central way of measuring that and looking at that. But again, FeedUK would be able to show that ongoing performance and help us to measure those interventions. Next one, please. So in terms of what does this do for you, I hope that those different examples have illustrated there's something in this for everyone, because it is the system of systems. And wherever you are in the system as a stakeholder, hopefully you'll be able to see your place in the system and in the national infrastructure, and indeed the global food system, and how that relates. So that the multiple scenarios that are coming our way, whether it's some risks around pandemics or whether it's the opportunities that can be seen by understanding that infrastructure better, then all of those things will become visible and much more easily accessible with a FeedUK. And it will enable us, I suppose, to work together and collaborate in a way that actually we have done throughout the coronavirus, but we've done that in a very manual way. So anybody who was on those food resilience calls at 8 o'clock in the morning, where 120 people were all sharing bits of data and insight, and we were trying to piece the bits of the jigsaw together. And don't get me wrong, we did a brilliant job. But how much easier would that job have been if we'd been able to share that data? And indeed, when we did share that data with things like identifying the vulnerable within the NHS and giving that permission for that data to be used by retailers and other distribution channels to identify those vulnerable, clinically vulnerable individuals, you know, the impact of that was enormous. And we did that data sharing in 36 hours. But that required lots of special permissions and relaxation of competition law. Imagine that that was the new norm, and that we could work that way collectively in the interest of the food system and the interest or greater public interest. Thank you.
So FeedUK will provide the infrastructure and the foundational elements on which companies can build new products and services. FeedUK will create a secure data exchange and potentially a marketplace for data owners. FeedUK will provide data producers, brands and retailers with the ability to provide richer provenance and food quality information to consumers. And FeedUK, as Judith has said, will provide the government with new tools to drive policies in areas such as nutrition, biosecurity and environmental impact, and to inform the negotiation of trade deals and to optimize the operation and security of the end-to-end food system. Now, much of the data within the food system is already mapped, but we have much more data discovery and mapping yet to do. And this discovery phase is an example of where we're going to need your help. FeedUK will not be implemented as some big bang technology project because, as we all know, those don't necessarily end terribly well. Instead, implementation will be incremental in a series of slices, probably starting with some horizontal end-to-end slices of the food system. And we're still in the process of deciding which the first slices will be based on maximizing the impact of the insights that we generate and the questions that we can then answer. And I'll now hand back to Judith, who will conclude the presentation.
Thank you. And I suppose the key thing for us is we've talked about the system of systems and making sure that the system actually has all stakeholders inputting into it. So we've been talking to lots of people. I'm looking now, there are 274 of you on the call today. We had 400 people registered for today. We've got 300 registered for next week, but we will have forgotten someone, or we will have forgotten a sector, or we will have forgotten, you know, part of this massive system. So the first thing is, if there is anyone we've forgotten, and if there are people that you think need to be part of this conversation, then we would love to know that. So feedback is a gift. Thank you. Next one, Paul. And as I say, this is a co-creation project. It's not a done deal. So we've shared with you the thinking that's gone on over probably the last year, and the work and conversations that we've done with lots of those stakeholders, but we're conscious it's still not the finished article. So as Paul just said now, you know, which slices we take, whether they're vertical or horizontal, and how we look at them to understand how we could make this work when it's all joined up is still to be decided. So I say it's not a done deal, but we do, as I say, want to be working with everyone to bring everyone on the journey with us, because if it doesn't work for the system, then it's not going to work at all. Next one, please. So in this first discovery phase that we've been talking about, we will do that definition of the slice. We're going to identify some of the quick wins. So materially, where would some of those quick wins be? And that's, you know, there are some big parts of this system that scream out to be looked at. And all the things that you can see there on the slide are the things that we would be doing in that first discovery phase. Next slide, please. And I suppose one of the things we, again, would love to know from you are, what are the three things, if you had any question that you could ask to be answered by this system of systems, what would it be? And actually, on the next slide, Paul, we asked a few key stakeholders in various positions and in different parts of the system what that could look like. And we've got everything from food safety and where best to intervene from a food safety point of view. We got the one that we've talked about already around productivity and where the best productivity gains could be made versus benchmarking other food systems. The scenario development, particularly around policy changes that we talked about. We talked about, is the system inherently stable or unstable in terms of the network? And do we need, for example, a strategic reserve of food? I know throughout the coronavirus, we've been talking at a national level about the national store cupboard, the national fridge, the national freezer, and the concept of understanding what our inventory looks like at a national level. And things around environment and health. We talked about the Environment Bill. So there's a number of things in terms of, as Paul talked about right at the very beginning, when we pull those levers, do we understand what that means elsewhere? What does that mean for carbon? What does that mean for water? What does that mean for the health of the nation? And things like, you know, childhood obesity. So there's some really good insights, but of course, again, we haven't got everything. So if you can answer that, what 3 things you would like to know, that would be brilliantly helpful. Next one, please. So what we're asking in these 2 briefing sessions is first of all, a letter of support to the Food and Drink Sector Council Innovation Working Group, because we will only persuade people that the need for this if it's the system that's asking for it. And we're not here to represent our bit of the system, we're here to represent the whole system, but we need those letters of support. And once we have the scope for the proof of concept, then we're going to need to set up working groups and steering groups to make that a reality. So if people have got the expertise and would want to be part of that, that would be great. You can approach us and we may approach you, but that's pretty key for this, is that we've got the right people on those groups. And then the last piece is, even if you're not involved and you're a interested party, one of the things that we will want to do is to keep everybody up to date in terms of what's going on and how this is working. So there will be regular scheduled updates. Next one, please. So this just repeats what I've asked for, but basically the support for the group, the identifying missing stakeholders, organisations, or indeed individuals, anything that you think of that might be a great first slice to take, endorsing the guiding principles of what this will do, so the ability of the tool to do many things, and basically your active support if you feel that that is something that is appropriate for you to join the appropriate groups and to contribute to the programme, because as I say, it's by the system for the system, and it will only be sustainable if that's the way that it works. And I think the next, timeline, I forgot that one. Obviously, we've got the stakeholder briefings. We want to very quickly get to the point throughout September where we're looking at workshops, so that we can get to the point of having the project, which is in this sense the discovery phase that I've just talked about, ready to submit, and then over the next 6 months working through what that might look like. And as you'll know, there is a government spending review coming in October. There are lots of things that are being proposed as part of that around digital twins, around data connectivity, because of the importance of those things in building a resilient national infrastructure. So the timing for this, be ideal if we had a little more time, and actually it'd be even better if we'd had this before the coronavirus. But actually, Paul and I were talking earlier, and he said the planets are aligned. And I said, I think the solar systems are aligned actually in this instance, but you know, the timing couldn't be better. So next one. So thank you for listening. And I think we haven't done too badly on time. Thank you, Simon. Back to you.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Both Judith, Paul, great to hear the scale of the ambition, the challenge, the impact on lots of different sectors and stakeholders. It does really sound interesting. So as part of that piece you're talking about of working out where the early pieces are, we're going to do a very crude way of getting some of that information down. Hopefully we'll rattle through this. So if you can open up another browser, or perhaps pick up your smartphone and go to menti.com. you'll then be prompted to submit a code. You'll see that code on the screen now, which is 7934533. I don't know why I made that so difficult. Starting off with a very easy question about your name and your organisation, and we'll just see how those come in. And then as we work through that, still keeping in your mind that question that was asked in the presentation about those 3 things that you wanted to ask, because ultimately we're going to get to those questions, but we just want to gather a little bit more information on the way through to that. So as we wait for people to open up browsers and log onto the system, unfortunately you've got to listen to my sort of waffling and filling in as we get some results in. So I think we're up to about 40. As Judith said, we touched almost 280 people earlier on today, and I think most have stayed on, dropping slightly with my waffling. So what we'll try and do is move on through the questions. I seem to have a little issue here with my moving on, just bear with me. Let's just put that back in present mode, and hopefully we should be able to. So I've rattled on a little bit now, and moving on to a nice question for us, so we know who's out there, about where you sit in the agri-food supply chain. I can see now this is a bit of an easier question for people. I've obviously misinterpreted or misguessed the audience that we've got. There's a lot of others, so I didn't quite get all the categories correct there, but we are moving on through. Okay, we're still answering some of those. Okay, this is a question that rose from the Catapult. Just wondering who out there has already had a go at this. I'd like to think probably not to the scale and ambition that's just been talked about by Paul and Judith. I don't see a lot of people have done things there. And again, we are getting quite good quick responses now, so I'll keep it going, because I know obviously there's a lot of interest, I imagine, to ask some questions of Judith and Paul, and you can still do that through the Q&A box, which is being monitored by colleagues Matt and Matt. So that's interesting that quite a few people have had a go. If we move on from there, what did you find? Again, I may have made the wrong guess here, but I'm saying you made cost savings from those trials that you've had, waste reduction, time savings, new insights, and obviously you've linked that back to how you answered where you sit in the supply chain. So it gives us a little bit more granular detail, if you like, on what's happening there. So it's the new insights that seems to be the major thing there, which is great. And it was quite nice listening to Judith and some of those things around. Obviously, I was well aware of the eggs, but I hadn't quite heard about the egg boxes and the lack of the egg boxes. Obviously, the other big one that hit the news was the flour, wasn't it? Where a lot of people ended up with a 25-kilo sack of flour in their kitchen to do their home baking. Okay, as we move on from there, here's this big question that was asked in the presentation. We've done this as a word cloud, so hopefully we might get some feeling of the size of the things there as people answer the same question the same way. Those 3 things you'd love to know about the food system. Sustainability, obviously a big one. And at the moment, the only one, but I'm sure the rest of you are going to be typing away busily. Don't worry if you get a few spelling mistakes in there, but we know what you need, really. Okay, so that's fantastic. That's running away now. Obviously, in the interest of time, we really want to move on to the Q&A session. So if I just stop sharing that for the moment and share an alternative screen with you here. Okay, so we've used that Q&A box, please. The mats are looking in the background. For those who have asked, there's been a question around the slides. We'll be working on the slides at some point. Obviously, we are rerunning this as a hopefully more polished event next week on my own performance, not on others' performance. So we won't be sharing the slides at the moment, and we may want to just reserve which ones we do share with you, but we will be in contact going forward. So at this point, can I hand over to Matt? Have you got a question lined up that you could ask, please?
Yeah, so I just want to start by saying in the chat, the majority of comments are really positive. So that's really good to see. I think the first question comes around FeedUK and how you envisage it might be funded and at what TRL it would be funded at. And that's open to both Paul and Judith.
Paul, do you want to take that?
I can go that. So there are various different funding routes, I think, that are being explored, at the moment. And as Judith says, there's a lot happening in this area. And to a certain extent, the answer to the second part of the question about what technology readiness level it'll be funded, it slightly depends, on whether we stand on the shoulders of other initiatives, particularly around things like the underlying data infrastructure, because, if some of that is going to be built by other initiatives, which I suspect it will, and indeed some of the digital commons for gluing together those digital twins will be, then if you like, we can take that for granted as part of this. And indeed that is what I really hope will happen, because we need that to be common common data infrastructure. We don't want something for FeedUK and something else for the National Digital Twin and so on. So it is very hard to say at the moment, but obviously we're going to be taking this all the way up to the highest TRL levels, as a live system, that is delivering, real insights and putting, if you like, the levers for discovering those insights in the hands of operators within the food system. Sorry about that.
No problem. So thank you very much, Paul. And I guess it's watch this space in some aspects and how the sort of funding landscape will sort of play out for this.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts at the moment, and it's quite difficult, to know exactly how everything's going to land. But as we said, this is core to things like the National Food Strategy, and therefore it's not some kind of sideline project. It's seen, I think, as being very important, and indeed it has sponsorship from the Food and Drink Sector Council and others.
No, thank you very much. So the second question is a two-parter, and there was a lot of chat in the Q&A box around data. And so, do we know what type of data are needed, and do we know who is responsible for perhaps providing that data, and where the main challenges and bottlenecks in data provision might be? And that leads on to the second part of the question. Is how can we get organisations to engage with providing this data and other information into the FeedUK proposal, right through from universities and researchers through to the businesses? So you can answer as little or as much as that as you want.
If I use some examples of what currently happens, so if you think about the overall governance for this and where that might sit, you could say that something that as important as this is something for the UK Statistics Authority, and that we would provide from this official national statistics in the way that we do something like the Retail Price Index. So for example, on the Retail Price Index, there's a thing called a digital user group, which is, I think, nearly 40 different retailers who provide all of the data, EPOS and sales data and pricing data, and then the Retail Price Index is formed from that. So you could imagine that there would be that level of national statistics and reporting. But if you think about this at a lower level, it's no different from smaller groups of people sharing data in order to provide meaningful insights. So, it's a bit like at one end, you've got things like the Met Office that provides amazing collections of data sets from all over the world, and And if you're a member of the public, you get that for free. But if you're a business like Sainsbury's, then, and you want really detailed information because it's material to what you choose to order next weekend, because if it's going to be a cold weekend or it's going to be a warm weekend, that can make the huge difference to the fruit and veg and the meat that you sell. You will pay a lot of money for that. So how that then gets managed, because something like the Met Office obviously managed in a very different way, is up for question. But I would go back to Paul's point, is that from a data point of view, this is the grand enabler of the National Food Strategy. And if it is the grand enabler of the National Food Strategy, then finding a way to manage that data at a national level in the public interest, which it is in the public interest to have a resilient food system, you can imagine that we will find the ways to do that in a way that is equitable, fair, democratized and protected. Which I know
Can I just add something to that on the second part, which is I think one of the things that happened during the relatively early days of the pandemic is the government realized it didn't have all the data that they needed, particularly the real-time data, in order to manage this crisis, to control R and so on. And so in the same way, you know, if we want people to share their data as part of that data infrastructure that we need to build, we need not only the data marts, but we need the data passports. We need to be able to make sure that data can be shared in a way where we control who it's shared with and for what purposes. And indeed, in some cases, at what cost, because a lot of the really interesting data won't necessarily be for free. So as part of that wider work that needs to happen on data infrastructure and creating the data marts and the data passports and the ontologies and so forth, you know, we need that if we want these data to flow to the right places in a controlled way, in a secure way, and to give people the confidence that they can share those data because they know what it's going to be used for. So that really is fundamental to building this FeedUK initiative.
That's great, thank you very much. I think we might have time for a very sort of short question to kind of follow on from that before Simon wraps up. So just again on the kind of the data point, and we're talking about the national UK food strategy, but obviously our food supply chains are international. How do we then sort of roll out that ask for data to the international community? And is there a role for, I know a lot of people on the survey, the Menti survey just now, identify themselves as other, so perhaps not being a business. How do we engage those people that identify themselves as other, maybe they're from the research kind of community, in providing that ask for maybe data, maybe it's something else that can contribute to the FeedUK strategy?
Maybe I can start, Judith, and hand over to you. I mean, I think we mentioned sustainability, and it was interesting. It was obviously one of the highest scoring words in the word cloud. And, you know, tackling climate change and net zero is not a UK thing. You know, it's a planetary thing. And indeed, a lot of the data that we're talking about here will be really, really important in terms of understanding the impact of the food system, you know, on climate change. And so, and indeed, you know, if we're going to tackle climate change, you know, we're going to need to be building digital twins at a planetary scale, not just at a national scale. So you kind of start to see how the picture that Judith and I have been trying to paint today really is part of an even bigger picture, you know, at a planetary level, not only to understand the complete food system, but really to understand how a lot of other things that affect our planet operate in order to do what we need to do in tackling this next really big challenge that's on our plate in the form of net zero.
And I would add to that it's already happening in some places, just as a consequence of the nature of the system, the global system and the UK system. So there's a body called the Consumer Goods Forum, which some of you might be familiar with, and it's a membership body of 440 CEOs of agriculture businesses, food business, manufacturing, retailers globally. So it's got everyone in it from Amazon and Alibaba to Sainsbury's, Carrefour, to Walmart, to Cargill, Procter & Gamble, Unilever. A lot of those are global multinational companies that are looking at things from a global multinational level, not from a UK level. And the way that the Consumer Goods Forum is working is that many of the things that we've talked about today around sustainability, so whether that is plastic packaging, whether that is deforestation and forest positive supply chains, all of those kind of things are already being discussed at a global level and creating global platforms to basically collect and report on that data. So whether that's palm oil, whether it's soya, whether it's paper, pulp and packaging. So there are snippets and bits of the jigsaw that are already there. I think the challenge will be the bits of the jigsaw that are missing, where the data is either not of great quality and not of big enough scale to be meaningful. But that's why picking the first slices is going to be really important. So where we have got that data and where there can be some quick wins, where we can show the value of it, that will then encourage those areas that don't necessarily have good enough data in place. And indeed, some of the things, I mean, if you go back to the new legislation on deforestation-free value chains, we are going to have to track those global value chains and report on them in a risk-assessed way as part of that new legislation if it comes in. So it is the direction of travel, but quite right, it's a good question. We are not there yet, but I'm optimistic because we have got pockets of it.
That's great. Thanks, Matt, for posing those questions, and Judith, Paul, thanks very much for answering them. Clearly, there was a lot of interest out there. There's a lot of questions. Hopefully, you'll see on the screen. What we will do is try and get all the questions together from today and the next webinar on Monday. We'll produce a sort of FAQ that we can share with everybody on today. So it's my kind of job to round up. I think the clear message is great vision, great ambition. Paul and Judith, thank you very much for sharing that with us. From a KTN point of view, we're delighted to be able to help you on that journey and do some of those connections and build the networks, and I'm sure we can help fill some of those gaps in other sectors as we cover virtually every sector. What happens next, I guess, is what everybody wants to say. Well, you'll see some contact details on there today. I'm kind of keeping Paul and Judith out there because I'm sure that they've got a lot of the higher things to do and so those initiatives around trying to find the money within Treasury and other areas. But what we propose to do is we'll write to everybody who's been part of this. We'll probably do that after the second webinar. We'll invite you to come and be part of the future things. There'll probably be a tick box on there around contact details just to keep everything GDPR compliant. But if you have got any questions in the meantime, and myself, there's Simon at the top of there on the emails. It's the two Mats who've been working away in the background looking at the questions. There's also Ben's details on there. Ben's been quite a driving force from the DigiCat on this, and there's probably more detail and closer to the technology than myself. So we'll write to you. We'll invite you to become more of a formal group that we're working on. We are also going to be making plans in the background for the list I've got is for 9 different webinars focused on specifics in different sectors. Just while I read those out for you, it's agriculture, manufacturing, logistics and packaging, retail, wholesale and markets, food service, regulators, technology, consumers and local government. Hopefully that covers all. We'll have another look at the delegate list and that sort of thing and work on it. As I say, oh, Paul, have you got to go?
No, I just wanted to say, should we ask people if they want to write letters of support, which we hope they will, they could send them to you or to either of the Mats on those contact details, is right? And then you can obviously pass them on to Judith and myself.
Certainly happy to do that. Yeah, any support like that straight away would be brilliant. As I say, participation in those things. I think it's very exciting. I think the numbers of people that have joined us show that it is exciting. I think it was less than a week ago that we put the news out about this. So nearly 300 people online today at the peak. Another 300 and something have registered for next week. Great initiative. It's all looking very good. And I don't really want to have the final word. Paul or Judith, would you like to have the final word? Because I feel as if we're helping support. We're not the well, we'll champion it, but we're not the I was going to say flag bearers. That's not quite the right term. But bail me out, please. Please have the last words for me and close today's webinar.
Well, so I'll go first, and then I'll let Paul have the final words. But I would just say we don't have all the answers to this yet, but we know what we're trying to achieve and we know the value of it. And it's very hard to imagine that we can drive the kinds of things that we want to see, both in terms of the levelling up agenda and the health of the nation and the greater sustainability challenge that we've got, without something like this. I find it hard to think how we could achieve that.
Yeah, I'd just echo that and say I think this is a hugely exciting and timely initiative that could really not only help optimize the food system, but also be part of the kind of the bigger picture that we've referred to. And I think we really hope that you will decide to get involved and provide your support, because as Judith says, we definitely need all the help we can get, because this really is a massive undertaking. But if we can achieve it, it will have a huge impact on the UK. Thank you very much again for attending today.
Thanks everyone. That's the webinar concluded. Have a good evening.